The morning my daughter-in-law handed me a pen and said, "Just sign here, mother, it's for your safety," I felt my hands tremble. By the time I read the fine print, I realized she wasn't protecting me, she was erasing me. If this beginning already made your heart race a little, stay with me, because what happened next turned that signature into a war for my own name. And while you're here, if you enjoy stories where truth and justice finally meet, please like and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Before we start, I want you to picture this with me. A woman in her late 60s sits in her own living room. Her living room. Her name is Evelyn Carter. She's wearing the same pearls she wore on her wedding day 40 years ago. On the coffee table in front of her, a neat stack of legal documents, a fountain pen, a folded tissue. Across from her sits a man in a suit and a polite smile, the kind of smile people use when they've already decided how the next hour of your life will go. Beside him, my son's wife, Brianna, rests a hand on her belly, like motherhood makes her holy. She is smiling at me, like she's doing me a kindness. And I say, very quietly, "Before I sign anything, we're going to make a little stop at the sheriff's office. Detective Alvarez is waiting for my statement." Her smile dies. The lawyer stops breathing. And that is the moment they both realize, I am not confused, I am not tame, I am not theirs to move. If you felt the air change just now, good, stay with me. Because I need you to understand how I got to that moment, and why you, sitting where you are, might be closer to that same table than you think. 3 nights before that confrontation, I watched my only son, Daniel Carter, get married. I sat in the same church where I married his father back when rent was $93, and we thought love could outbuild hunger. Sunlight pushed through stained glass and painted all our faces in holy colors. Daniel looked so proud in his suit. Brianna glowed in ivory and soft makeup and practiced innocence. She is 34, he is 43, I am 69. And I will admit this now. I wanted to believe. I wanted to believe that she loved him. I wanted to believe that this was going to save me from a kind of loneliness I was too proud to name. Her baby, my first grandchild, was due in 8 weeks. That detail matters. That detail is how the trap got dressed as love. Let me tell you about the money, because you need to hear it out loud. $27,000. That's what I gave them in the months running up to this wedding. Not loaned with paperwork, not discussed in a conference room with witnesses present, no. Handed over across kitchen counters and back seats, and hushed, guilty phone calls that started with, "Mom, I hate to ask you this, but $27,000, that is retirement money. That is knee surgery money. That is, what if I fall and can't work money. That is 20 years of saying no to new coats and buying dented cans and reusing Ziploc bags. That is me walking instead of driving so Daniel wouldn't have to start his marriage in debt. I didn't think of it as paying. I thought of it as cushioning him. That's what mothers do, right? We break first so they don't have to." The reception was at Brookside Country Club, all white linens and gold cutlery and imported lilies. I know that place. I used to mop champagne off those floors for $11 an hour when Daniel was 19, and pretending student loans were free money. I carried trays there until my wrists went numb, so he could have a life where no one ever handed him a tray. Funny how life loops back and shows you who everybody really is. Dinner ended. Silverware settled. Glasses clinked. Daniel stood, cleared his throat, tapped his champagne flute with a fork. That sound is always the sound of something rehearsed. "I just want to thank everyone who made today possible," he said. "My beautiful wife, our amazing friends, my mother, who's always been there when I needed her." He smiled at me like a little boy. The room made warm noises. I felt my eyes sting. I will always love him. That is both the blessing and the wound. Then Brianna stood. If you have ever watched a snake shed its skin, you know the feeling I had. She stepped into center frame like the moment had been saved for her. She rested one hand over her stomach, for sympathy points, and the other on Daniel's shoulder, for ownership. "I want to say something about Evelyn," she said, and the whole room stilled. Now listen very carefully to what she said next. "When I met Daniel, I didn't have a mother who showed up for me," she said. Her voice wavered just enough to be attractive. "But Evelyn, she has been living with us. supporting us, helping us with our down payment, making sure we're okay. She told me last week, "Honey, I don't care if I live off soup and crackers as long as you two are taken care of." That's love. People at the table made sympathetic little sighs. I heard one woman whisper, "That poor thing. She can't live alone anymore." I felt it like a slap. Brianna kept going. So many women, when their sons get married, they step back and say, "He's her problem now." But not Evelyn. She has been so involved, so generous, so present. She still takes care of Daniel, even now. That's real motherhood. Do you hear it? It sounds like sweetness. It sounds like gratitude. It is not. It is documentation. In that moment, in front of 100 witnesses, she didn't call me mother. She called me dependent. She didn't say, "She helped us with the wedding." She said, "She is living with us." Translation, she needs our care. She's already under our roof. She is basically ours. She didn't say, "She was kind enough to loan us money." She said, "She has sacrificed financially for us." Translation, there is no debt. There is no obligation to repay. The money is gone by choice. If I bring it up later, I will look greedy, bitter, ungrateful, unstable. She didn't say, "She respects boundaries." She said, "She is still so involved, so present, still taking care of Daniel." Translation, she's intrusive. She doesn't let go. She's overattached. She's that kind of mother. And I sat there, in a dress I'd pulled from the back of my closet and re-hemmed myself, because alterations are so expensive, Mom, and we just don't have any wiggle room, and I felt my throat close around air. Everyone clapped, the way people clap at speeches they don't fully understand but feel obligated to approve. But I saw their faces. I saw pity. I saw discomfort. I saw a younger woman at table 4 mouth the words, "That's not healthy," to her boyfriend. And right then, under those chandeliers, in front of those lilies I helped pay for, I understood something that made my stomach go cold. This wasn't a thank you. This was a setup. This was Brianna building a public story. Evelyn is financially entangled in our household. Evelyn lives with us. Evelyn depends on us. Evelyn can't function on her own. Evelyn is already being cared for by us. We are already responsible for her. Everyone heard it, right? Great. Remember that later when we make decisions for her. Do you see it now? Because predators don't open with the bite, they open with the alibi. Some moments in your life, you don't feel them while they're happening. They slide by. You only realize later that that was the hinge, that was the cut, that was the turn you never came back from. This wasn't that. I felt this one in real time. I felt it in my bones. I sat there and I thought, my son is in danger. Not from a stranger, from the woman holding his arm. And worse, so am I. If you've stayed with me this far, thank you. I know stories like this can stir something deep, maybe anger, maybe sadness, maybe a memory you thought you'd buried. If you'd like to keep hearing real stories about mothers, families, and the quiet ways people fight back, consider subscribing. That simple click helps me keep sharing voices that deserve to be heard. And I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Imagine you were sitting at that same wedding table, hearing those words that quietly turn you into a burden in front of everyone. What would you do? A. Stay silent to keep the peace for your child's big day. B. Speak up, even if it means breaking the moment. Tell me what feels right to you and why. I'm genuinely curious to know how you would handle it. The morning after the wedding was strangely quiet. The house smelled of lilies and leftover champagne, a reminder of a celebration that was supposed to mark a beginning. I had barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Brianna standing at that microphone, telling a room full of strangers that I was living with them because I needed to be taken care of. Those words clung to me like smoke. I woke up before dawn, hoping a walk would clear my head, but the silence in the kitchen felt staged, rehearsed. Something was waiting for me there. By 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I opened it, expecting Daniel. It wasn't him. Brianna stood there in a pale blue dress, perfect makeup, perfect posture. Beside her was a man I had never seen before. A lawyer by the look of him, polished briefcase, polite expression. "Good morning, Evelyn," she said brightly, as if nothing about yesterday had happened. "This is Mr. Kessler. He's here to go over a few papers. It's just a formality, really." Mr. Kessler smiled. "Mrs. Carter, it's an honor. I understand we're finalizing some updates to your living arrangements and financial accounts. Shouldn't take more than 20 minutes. I stood there holding the door, half in the sunlight, half in the shadow of the entryway. "Living arrangements?" I asked. Brianna brushed past me, as if she owned the place. "We wanted to surprise you," she said, glancing over her shoulder, "but Daniel thought it might be better if I explained it first." She sat down at the kitchen table like a hostess in her own home. "We found you the perfect place," she said. "Sunset Hills Residence. It's gorgeous. They have gardens, book clubs, even Tai Chi classes. You'll have your own room, full staff, and best of all, no more worrying about bills or housework. It's safer for everyone." "Safer," I repeated. "For everyone." She nodded eagerly. "You've had a few slips lately. Forgetting appointments, leaving the stove on, losing your keys. Nothing serious, of course, but Daniel worries. He wants to make sure you're comfortable and protected. The world's getting dangerous for older people living alone." I looked at the man with the folder. "And your part in all this?" He cleared his throat. "I'm simply facilitating the transfer of property rights for refinancing purposes. Your son and daughter-in-law will handle the mortgage under their names going forward. It's the most efficient option for tax and credit purposes." "Transfer," I said slowly, "of property rights." He nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Once you sign, they can finalize the new loan, and you'll be free of financial responsibilities." Brianna smiled at me with that bright, controlled kindness that always made me uneasy. "It's just cleaner this way, Evelyn. You'll thank us later." Something in me went cold. There are moments when time stops not from beauty, but from danger. I saw the pen she'd laid out beside the papers, the gleam of the metal tip. I realized she expected me to sign before I'd even had breakfast. "Where's Daniel?" I asked. "At the gym," she said without hesitation. "He gets anxious around paperwork." It was such a small lie, but it carried the weight of 1,000 others. My son wasn't at the gym. He was hiding. I took a deep breath. "Let me understand. You've arranged to move me out of my home, sign over the house, and give Daniel full control of my money, and you've done this without asking me." "It's for your own good," she said gently. "We're just trying to make things easier. You shouldn't have to worry about details at your age." That sentence hit me harder than any insult. At your age, I was 69, not 89. I still paid my own bills, cooked my own meals, drove my own car. I didn't need saving. I needed respect. I turned to Mr. Kessler. "How long have you been practicing law?" 32 years, he said, straightening. "And in those 32 years, have you ever asked an elderly woman to sign over her property without her own lawyer present?" He hesitated. "I was informed this was a family decision." "It isn't," I said. Brianna's tone sharpened. "Evelyn, please. You're making this dramatic. We're not taking anything from you. You'll still visit, of course. You'll have your own space. You said yourself this house feels too big now that Daniel's married. You'll love Sunset Hills." "I never said that," I replied. "You must have forgotten," she said, smiling thinly. I stared at her. "No, you just decided that's what I should have said." For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then I reached for the folder, flipped it open, and scanned the first page. I didn't need to be a lawyer to see the words transfer of deed and durable power of attorney. My name was printed in smaller font than theirs, like an afterthought. I looked up. "You should both leave now." Brianna's smile faltered. "Evelyn." I said leave. My voice came out calm, not loud, and that scared her more than shouting would have. "If Daniel wants to talk to me, he knows where to find me. You do not come into my house again with strangers and papers I never asked for." Mr. Kessler stood awkwardly, muttering something about misunderstanding. Brianna followed him to the door, murmuring apologies that didn't sound like apologies at all. Before she stepped outside, she turned back to me and said softly, "You're tired, Evelyn. You've been through a lot. Don't do something you'll regret." I watched her walk down the driveway, confident, certain she still held the upper hand. When their car disappeared, I sat at the table for a long time, My hands were shaking. On the counter, a vase of wedding roses was beginning to wilt. That was when the realization came, not as a burst of panic, but as a slow, terrible understanding. This wasn't just about money. This was about control. She was laying the groundwork to declare me incompetent. Every forgetful moment, every story about me, wandering, every exaggerated sigh about how I get confused, they weren't random remarks. They were evidence, manufactured proof for a future court petition. It felt like watching someone build a cage around me, one polite conversation at a time. But here's what Brianna didn't know. I had already built my own kind of protection. 3 months earlier, when Daniel had first said, "Mom, let's just sign a power of attorney in case of emergency," I'd gone to the senior legal clinic downtown. A retired lawyer named Mrs. Green had looked over the document, frowned, and helped me rewrite it. Under my version, the power of attorney could only take effect if 2 independent physicians declared me mentally incapable, not family doctors, not anyone paid by Daniel or Brianna, 2 impartial medical professionals. That paper was locked in a metal box under my bed, along with the house deed, the loan receipt for the $27,000, and copies of every bank transfer I had made in the past year. As I sat in that silent kitchen, I went through each of them again, line by line, until the shaking in my hands stopped. Then I made 2 calls. The first was to my doctor, Dr. Tran, who had known me for 12 years and who had no patience for people trying to play games with her elderly patients. I told her what had just happened. She promised to document my mental competence in writing that same afternoon. The second call was to the county sheriff's office, Elder Abuse Division. A detective named Luis Alvarez picked up. I explained everything what they'd said, who was there, what papers they'd brought. When I told him about the assisted living arrangement I'd never agreed to, he went quiet. "Don't sign anything," he said. "If they show up again, call me immediately. We're going to start a file." After I hung up, I sat by the window watching sunlight crawl across the floor. I should have felt terrified, but I didn't. I felt something steadier, cold, clear, focused. You see, fear is what they count on. Fear makes you compliant, but once you see the pattern, once you recognize the story being written about you without your consent, fear stops working. That morning, with the papers still spread across my table, I realized something I wish every older person could understand. Being polite can cost you everything. They thought I would be too grateful, too ashamed, too motherly to say no. But what they didn't know is that a mother's instinct doesn't disappear with age, it sharpens. It sees danger long before anyone else admits it's there. And I had just seen enough to know I was in one. 2 days later, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing across the nightstand. The display showed Daniel's name. For a moment, I hoped it meant an apology, some trace of the boy who once called to say goodnight every time he got home safe. But his first words stripped that hope bare. "Mom," he said, "Brianna told me you overreacted. She was just trying to help. You can't talk to lawyers and the police over family misunderstandings." I sat up in bed. "Family misunderstandings don't come with contracts, Daniel." He sighed, the way people sigh when they've already decided you're unreasonable. "You've been stressed. You said yourself you've been forgetting things." My throat tightened. That lie again, my supposed forgetfulness, the seed Brianna had planted and watered until it grew into something Daniel could use. I didn't argue. I told him calmly that I was fine and asked him to come by that evening. He promised he would, but he didn't. Instead, at noon, a woman from the county's Adult Protective Services knocked on my door. She introduced herself as Mrs. Lang, and her voice was kind but careful, the tone of someone who's been told to treat you like fragile glass. She said there had been a report about possible self-neglect. "Someone mentioned concerns about your medication and your ability to manage your finances." I almost laughed. "Let me guess," I said. "Someone named Brianna." Mrs. Lang hesitated. "I can't disclose that." Of course she couldn't. She asked to look around the house. I let her. My kitchen was spotless, my fridge organized, my bills filed by month. I offered her tea. After half an hour, she admitted she saw no cause for alarm. "Honestly, Mrs. Carter, I've seen cases where the children are the problem, not the parent," she said, and wrote something firm in her notebook. But I'll have to file a report either way. That's procedure. After she left, I sat in the silence again. They were escalating, testing boundaries, seeing how much they could get away with. I thought about all the small humiliations I'd ignored, the times Brianna corrected my words in front of guests, or exaggerated my arthritis tremors like a performance, or spoke for me in stores. Each one, at the time, had seemed too petty to confront. Now I understood they were rehearsals for this. That night, I started recording. Every call, every conversation. I bought a small voice recorder, the kind reporters use, and slipped it into my cardigan pocket. When Daniel finally showed up the next day, I was ready. He looked tired, dark circles, unshaven, his voice quieter than usual. "Mom, we just want what's best for you," he said, lowering himself into the chair across from me. "Then listen," I said, "because I'm about to tell you what's best for me." He looked wary. "I know what Brianna's doing," I said. "I know about the paperwork. I know about the stories. I've spoken with Detective Alvarez. There's a file now." His eyes widened. "Mom, you called the police on us?" "I called them for me," I said, "because no one else was going to." He stood, pacing. "You don't understand. She's pregnant. She's stressed," she thought. "She thought she could erase me," I said quietly. "Don't defend that." He stopped then. For a brief moment he looked like a little boy again, scared, uncertain. "She said you wanted this," he whispered, "that you told her you were tired of managing the house." I shook my head. "I never said that." He looked down at the floor, his jaw tightening. "She showed me a note, your handwriting. It said, 'Maybe it's time I step back.'" A chill ran through me. Then she forged it. That was the turning point. He didn't say he believed me, but something in his expression cracked. He sat back down, rubbing his temples. "Mom, I need to think." "Do that," I said, "but think fast, because this isn't just a disagreement, it's fraud." After he left, I drove to the sheriff's office myself. Detective Alvarez met me in a small room lined with posters about financial exploitation. I gave him the voice recording of Brianna's earlier visit and the copy of the documents she'd tried to make me sign. He listened, taking notes. When he heard Brianna's line, "It's safer for everyone this way," he paused the playback. "That's coercive language," he said. "If she's trying to make decisions about your property without consent, that's a felony." He asked for the lawyer's name and the date he'd come. I gave him everything. "You've already done half our work for us," he said, smiling slightly. "You're sharper than most of my rookies." "Old age has its uses," I said. By evening, the sheriff's office had already made preliminary calls to confirm the lawyer's identity. Turns out Mr. Kessler wasn't a family attorney. He was a mortgage broker recently disciplined for falsifying client signatures. It was bigger than Brianna's little power play. She'd found someone who would help her forge the cage. That night, I got another call, this time from Patricia, Brianna's mother. Her voice trembled. "Evelyn, I need to talk to you privately," she said. "I don't want Brianna to know." We met at a cafe near the library. She looked older than I remembered, her hands twisting the paper cup. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't raise her like this. But she's been doing this for years. Her last husband's father, same thing. She told everyone he was senile and took his pension. I thought it was gossip until now." Hearing it confirmed both relieved and sickened me. Patricia handed me an envelope, copies of old police reports, bank transfers, text messages. "She's clever," Patricia said, "but not careful. You can use this." I thanked her, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the weight on my chest ease. The next morning, I called Detective Alvarez again. I told him about Patricia, about the evidence. He listened in silence, then said, "You're building a case that's going to stick. Keep everything. We'll need her mother's statement officially." "I'll ask her to sign one," I said. "You won't need to," he replied. "We'll handle it." That night, my phone buzzed again, Brianna, this time. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Her voice was cold, stripped of its sugary coating. "You've made a mistake, Evelyn," she said. "This is going to destroy Daniel." "I'm not the one destroying him," I said. "You are." "You don't understand," she hissed. "You can't win." "I already have," I said, and hung up. When I turned off the lights that night, I sat by the window watching the street lamps hum. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of being alone. The house was mine again, quiet, yes, but honest. And beneath the quiet, there was something else, a steady hum of purpose. Because revenge, when you're older, doesn't look like screaming or throwing things. It looks like documentation. It looks like truth printed in black and white. It looks like patience. I wasn't just going to protect myself anymore. I was going to make sure women like me never had to feel this helpless again. That thought, calm, clean, resolute, carried me into sleep. And in my dream, I saw the wedding flowers finally wilt, their petals curling into paper. Not a symbol of loss, but of evidence. Something that once pretended to be beautiful, finally showing what it really was. 3 mornings later, a police cruiser parked quietly across the street from my house. Detective Alvarez stepped out, holding a folder thick with papers. I met him on the porch before he could knock. "Good news," he said, lowering his voice. "Your daughter-in-law's scheme didn't stay private for long. The mortgage broker flipped." He admitted Brianna approached him weeks ago, asking how to transfer property for an elderly relative showing cognitive decline. "We've got emails." I nodded, though my hands trembled slightly around the coffee mug I was holding. "And Daniel?" I asked. "He's not charged," Alvarez said carefully. "Not yet, but we'll need his statement soon." That last part stayed with me. Not yet. There was still a chance to save him from being pulled into her mess. A small chance, but mine to take. That afternoon, I called Daniel again. He didn't answer. So I left a message, not angry, not pleading, just steady. "You need to come home, son. Come home and look at the truth with your own eyes." He showed up at sunset. I watched from the window as he stood on the porch, uncertain, the way a boy hesitates before confessing something to his mother. When he stepped inside, he saw the folder on the table, my own evidence beside the detective's. "What's all this?" he asked. "It's everything your wife has done," I said quietly. "Her history, her pattern. Read it." He opened the folder, saw the police reports Patricia had provided Brianna's previous fraud cases, the withdrawals from her last husband's father's account, the restraining order that had been sealed in another county. I watched his face shift from confusion to disbelief to horror. "She told me they were all lies," he whispered. "I know," I said. "That's what she does. She lies to people who love her until they can't tell truth from loyalty." He sank into a chair. "What happens now?" I took a deep breath. "Detective Alvarez is filing formal charges tomorrow, but you have a choice tonight. You can help them, or you can help her." He rubbed his face with both hands. "She's carrying my child." "She's carrying a child," I corrected. "But that child deserves a father who knows right from wrong." He didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he said, "If I talk to Alvarez, she'll know I turned on her." "She already knows," I said softly. "She's just waiting to see if you'll prove it." That night, Daniel went to the station. I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room, the house dark except for one lamp, listening to the sound of distant sirens and wondering how it had come to this, how love could twist itself into a weapon. By morning, everything changed. Brianna was arrested leaving a coffee shop downtown, her phone still in hand. The detective called me personally. "She didn't take it well," he said. "But we've got her on attempted financial fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy." When I hung up, I felt no joy, just a long, exhausted relief, like exhaling after holding my breath for months. I went outside, stood in the garden, and let the wind move through my hair. The air felt different, honest again. Later that afternoon, Patricia came by. She looked both apologetic and proud. "She called me from the station," she said, still blaming everyone but herself, but I told her this time she'd gone too far. "You did the right thing," I said. "So did you," she replied. "Most people your age would have folded." I smiled faintly. "Folding is easy. It's living with it afterward that's hard." Over the next week, everything unfolded quickly. Daniel moved into a small apartment nearby, separated from Brianna officially. He filed for temporary custody, citing emotional manipulation and endangerment. The court granted it. Brianna's bail was denied after prosecutors presented the emails and recordings. I sat in the courtroom the day she was arraigned. She wore a gray sweater instead of her usual polished dresses. When the judge read the charges: elder financial abuse, coercion, falsifying documents, she didn't look at me once. But when she turned toward Daniel, I saw it in her eyes. Disbelief. The realization that her control was gone. After the hearing, Daniel walked over, eyes red. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he said. "I know," I answered. "Just make sure you never forget what it took to learn this." We left together, walking into the bright afternoon. It felt almost unreal, the calm, after a storm so loud I thought it would never end. In the weeks that followed, life slowly reshaped itself. I had the locks changed. The notary who'd accompanied Brianna came forward voluntarily, offering testimony in exchange for leniency. Alvarez told me the case might set a precedent for elder fraud protections in the county. That made me proud, not for revenge, but for meaning, like maybe what I'd endured could help someone else. Daniel started coming by every evening after work. Sometimes he brought groceries, sometimes just company. He talked about the baby, about how he'd name her Emma Grace. He asked if I'd be willing to help when she was born. I told him yes, under one condition, that he never again confuse obedience with love. The night before the sentencing hearing, I sat at my writing desk and drafted a victim statement. Not angry, not dramatic, just truth. I wrote about the humiliation of being treated like a child, the fear of losing my home, the nights spent wondering if my son saw me as a burden, and I wrote about resilience, about how one woman saying no can stop a cycle of exploitation that feeds on silence. In court the next day, I read it aloud. My voice didn't shake. When I finished, even the judge looked moved. Brianna was sentenced to 18 months in state prison and 3 years probation. The courtroom was silent except for the shuffle of papers. Afterward, as I walked outside, a reporter from a local paper stopped me. "Mrs. Carter," she said, "how does it feel to see justice done?" I thought about it for a moment. "Justice doesn't feel like victory," I said. "It feels like peace." Months passed. Emma was born, a tiny, perfect girl with Daniel's eyes. When he brought her over for the first time, I held her close, the way I'd once held him. She smelled like milk and new beginnings. "Mom," Daniel said quietly, "I've been thinking about selling the house. You could take half, start somewhere new." I looked around at the walls that had witnessed everything, the laughter, the lies, the confrontation. "No," I said. "I think this house has seen enough endings. It deserves to be a beginning again." He smiled. "Then we'll rebuild right here." In that moment, I realized something simple and profound. Revenge may begin in anger, but real justice ends in clarity. I hadn't fought to win. I'd fought to remember who I was, a woman who could stand her ground, even when everyone expected her to fall. As the sun set through the kitchen window, painting the room gold, I whispered to Emma, "You'll grow up knowing that love isn't about control, it's about courage." She opened her tiny fist and grabbed my finger, and for the first time in a long while I believed the world could still be kind. A month passed before the trial, but those weeks felt like another kind of test. People whispered, neighbors speculated, and every errand came with curious glances that asked what kind of mother takes her own daughter-in-law to court. I learned to walk through it without shrinking. The truth didn't need defending, it just needed time to stand on its own feet. I spent those days putting my life back together piece by piece. The house felt lighter, as if the walls themselves were relieved to see honesty return. I replaced the curtains, painted the porch, and donated the wedding gifts Brianna had chosen: gold-rimmed plates, crystal glasses, all symbols of a life she'd tried to steal and script for me. Each box I gave away felt like closing a wound. Daniel visited often, usually quiet, often guilty. He'd sit with Emma sleeping in her carrier and watch the baby's chest rise and fall. Once he said, "I keep thinking about the look you gave me when I didn't believe you. I don't think I'll ever forgive myself." "You already have," I told him. "You just don't know it yet." The day before sentencing, Alvarez came by to drop off final paperwork. He handed me a sealed envelope. "From the DA," he said. "They're recommending restitution. Full repayment, plus interest, of every dollar you lost." I smiled faintly. Justice doesn't usually come with interest. He chuckled. You'd be surprised. That night, I ironed the same navy dress I'd worn to every important moment of my life. Daniel's graduation, my husband's funeral, even the day I signed the mortgage. It had become my armor. When I stood in front of the mirror, I saw lines around my mouth that hadn't been there before, but they didn't look like weakness. They looked like proof I'd survived. The courtroom the next morning was packed. Reporters sat in the back. A local advocacy group for seniors had shown up too, holding small signs that read, "Protect our elders." Brianna was brought in wearing a beige suit and no makeup. She looked smaller, though not sorry, more stunned, as if she still couldn't believe the world had stopped revolving around her. When the judge called my name, I walked to the stand. The microphone caught my breath, but my voice was steady. I told the court what it feels like to have your kindness rewritten as confusion, your love treated as leverage, your years of care turned into evidence of incompetence. I said that elder abuse doesn't start with violence, it starts with persuasion, with someone deciding they know what's best for you and expecting your silence as consent. Brianna kept her eyes fixed on the table. When I finished, the judge nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mrs. Carter," she said. "Your courage has likely protected others who don't yet know they're in danger." The sentence came down clean and firm. 18 months in state prison, 3 years of supervised release, mandatory restitution, and a permanent mark on her record barring her from handling another person's finances. Outside, the wind was crisp, and the cameras waited, but I didn't stop for interviews. I just wanted air, space, quiet. Daniel walked beside me carrying Emma, who was gurgling softly under a knit blanket. "It's over," he said. "No," I replied, "it's beginning." And it was. A month later, I received a letter from a nonprofit that had followed my case. They wanted to name me as one of their honorary advisors for an elder rights initiative. They were calling it the Carter Project. I laughed when I read it. The girl who once cleaned houses for other families was now helping build legal protections for women her age. Life, it seemed, still had a sense of humor. I accepted. I started volunteering one morning a week, answering calls from seniors afraid to speak out, helping them document what was happening. I taught them the same lesson I had learned, that evidence is the quietest form of power. Daniel rebuilt his life, slowly but honestly. He sold the house, split the proceeds evenly, and bought a small place 10 minutes from me. On weekends, he'd bring Emma over and we'd sit in the garden. She'd crawl in the grass, fascinated by sunlight on her hands. Sometimes, I caught Daniel watching me, not with pity or guilt, but with gratitude. That look was enough. One Sunday, Patricia joined us for tea. She'd been volunteering too, helping other families recognize manipulation early. "Do you ever think she'll change?" she asked me quietly. "People like Brianna don't change," I said, "but sometimes the people they hurt do." That night, after everyone left, I found myself sitting at my desk again, pen in hand, staring at a blank sheet of paper. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't writing a complaint or a statement. I was writing a letter to Emma. I told her that kindness is not weakness, that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, and that family is not defined by blood, but by respect. I told her that when someone tries to silence you by calling you crazy or forgetful, you speak louder because truth doesn't whisper. I ended it with a single line: "Love yourself enough to walk away from anyone who treats your peace like it's negotiable." I sealed the letter and tucked it into a drawer labeled "For Emma, when she's grown." In the quiet that followed, I realized something unexpected. I no longer felt angry. Not at Brianna, not even at the years I lost, believing I was safe from betrayal. The anger had burned itself into something stronger: clarity. That clarity shaped everything that came next. The following spring, Alvarez invited me to speak at a community event about elder financial abuse. I stood on the same courthouse steps where I'd once trembled, and this time my voice reached the back row. I told them my story not as a warning, but as proof. Dignity can survive deceit, and it can rise again stronger than before. When I finished, a woman in her 70s came up to me with tears in her eyes. "I thought it was just me," she said. I squeezed her hand. "It never is," I told her. That evening, Daniel stopped by with dinner. As we ate, he said, "You know, Mom, Emma's going to grow up hearing this story. She'll know what you did." "I don't want her to remember the fight," I said. "I want her to remember the freedom." After he left, I walked out to the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft amber. The house behind me felt alive again, not haunted, not broken, but earned. Every scar on its walls, every creak in its floors, was a reminder. I had lived, fought, and rebuilt on my own terms. And somewhere beyond that horizon, I imagined the woman I used to be, the one who stayed quiet to keep the peace, finally smiling, finally at rest. Because she had learned what I now knew in my bones: the most powerful revenge is not rage, it's peace that no one can take from you again. By the following winter, the house had changed in ways I hadn't expected. It no longer felt like a place haunted by what happened, it felt like a chapter rewritten. The cracks in the walls had been painted over, the garden had grown wild again, and in the evenings, when the wind moved through the trees, it almost sounded like laughter instead of ghosts. Daniel came over most nights with Emma. She was beginning to talk then, little fragments of words, pieces of songs she made up on the spot. Sometimes she'd toddle into my sewing room, pull at the edge of a blanket and say, "Make for baby," and I would smile because she didn't know that in some small way she had saved all of us. My days had filled with purpose again. Between volunteering with the elder rights group and helping mothers who'd been pushed out of their own homes, my time was no longer something to kill, it was something to offer. I'd started mentoring other women my age who were facing the same kind of betrayal I had lived through. Most of them were still in that first stage, the disbelief, the shaking hands, the long nights wondering how their own children could do this. I didn't try to fix them. I just told them the truth. The day you stop begging to be understood is the day you start being free. One afternoon, I was sitting at the community center when a woman named Nora came in. She was 72, a retired teacher, soft-spoken but sharp-eyed. She clutched a folder to her chest like a life jacket. "My daughter says I'm forgetful," she whispered, as if even saying it out loud could make it true. She took me to a doctor I'd never met. He asked me 3 questions and told her I shouldn't live alone anymore. I listened, every word echoing pieces of my own story. By the time she finished, her hands were trembling. I placed mine over hers. "You're not crazy," I said. "You're being set up." That night, I helped her draft a letter to her bank, freezing her accounts until a neutral third party could review them. I gave her the contact number for Detective Alvarez's department, told her to record everything, to document every word. When she left, she hugged me so tightly it hurt. Moments like that reminded me that what I had endured wasn't just tragedy, it was training. Pain, if you survive it, becomes instruction. But healing isn't a straight road. A few weeks later, Daniel came over with a folded envelope in his hand. "Mom," he said softly, "you might not want to read this, but I think you should." It was from Brianna. She had written from prison. "Evelyn," it began, "I know you won't believe me, but I'm sorry. Not for getting caught for hurting Daniel, for trying to take what wasn't mine. I used to think control was safety. I don't know who I am without it." I read the letter twice, then folded it carefully. I didn't feel anger, not even pity, just distance, like reading about someone else's life. "What do you want to do with it?" Daniel asked. "Keep it," I said. "One day Emma might ask about her mother. Let her decide what kind of story it becomes." He nodded, relief flickering across his face. "You're stronger than anyone I know." I smiled faintly. "No, son, I just learned to stop being afraid of being alone." In February, the Elder Rights Group invited me to speak at a statewide conference. I nearly said no. Public speaking had never been my dream, but Daniel insisted. "People need to hear this," he told me. "You don't realize how many families are still silent." So I went. I stood on a stage beneath harsh lights, looking out at rows of faces: gray-haired men, widows, nurses, social workers. My hands shook at first, but when I began to talk, the fear melted away. I told them how easily love can be weaponized, how dependence is often built out of small, polite gestures. I told them that manipulation doesn't come wearing fangs, it comes wearing concern. When I finished, the room was quiet. Then a man in the front row, tall, late 60s, with tears in his eyes, stood up and clapped. The rest followed. Later he came to me and said, "My brother's wife did the same thing to our mother. We thought she was losing her mind. We were wrong." He pressed my hand and whispered, "Thank you for waking me up." On the drive home, I cried not from sadness, but from the strange lightness that comes when you know your pain has been put to use. Life kept unfolding, softer now, less like a storm and more like a long breath after drowning. I started keeping a journal again, not to record evidence this time, but gratitude. Every entry began the same way. "I am still here." By spring, the garden was alive with violets and lavender, just like the ones my husband had planted decades ago. I spent mornings there, trimming and tending, Emma toddling beside me with her toy watering can. One morning she looked up at me and asked, "Grandma, are you happy now?" I thought about that for a long moment. "Yes," I said, "but happy doesn't mean nothing bad ever happened. It means I don't let it own me anymore." She nodded, serious in the way only small children can be, and said, "You're strong." Her words stayed with me. Strength, I realized, isn't something you're born with. It's something you earn every time you refuse to disappear. That summer, the foundation offered to name one of their new housing projects after me, affordable apartments for widows and seniors starting over. They wanted to call it Evelyn House. I almost refused, but then I thought of all the women who would walk through those doors, scared and uncertain, and realized they weren't alone. So I said yes. At the opening ceremony, I stood beneath a white banner with my name on it and thought about the girl I used to be, the one who sat in her kitchen trembling while strangers tried to take everything she'd built. That woman would never have believed this ending was possible. After the speeches, Daniel came up beside me, holding Emma in his arms. "You did it, Mom," he said. I looked at the building, the sunlight glinting off its windows. "No," I said quietly, "we did." He smiled. "Do you ever think about what you'd say to Brianna if you saw her again?" I watched Emma tug at his collar, laughing, her tiny fingers tangled in his hair. "Yes," I said. "I'd tell her thank you." He looked startled. "Thank you?" "Yes," I said softly, "for reminding me that I wasn't finished, that even after being broken, a person can build again, and not just a life, but a legacy." That night, after they left, I walked through the quiet house and turned off each light one by one. The rooms were peaceful, filled not with memory but with presence. In the mirror, my reflection no longer looked like a victim or even a survivor. It looked like someone who had come full circle. I stood there for a long moment, and then whispered to myself the words I'd written in that letter for Emma. "Love yourself enough to walk away from anyone who treats your peace like it's negotiable." Outside, the night was clear. The stars were bright, steady, almost defiant, and for the first time in years, I didn't just feel safe, I felt free. The year after the trial felt like another lifetime. Seasons passed without chaos, without whispered rumors or late-night phone calls. I had expected peace to feel quiet, but it wasn't. It hummed with small, steady things. Morning sunlight spilling across the table, the sound of Emma's laughter echoing through the garden. The weight of a cup of coffee warming my hands before dawn. That was the kind of peace I had fought for, the kind that didn't demand explanation. But life has a way of testing what it gives back. One morning, a letter arrived, an official envelope from the state correctional facility. I knew before opening it who it was from. Brianna. Her release date was approaching. My heart didn't race the way it once might have. I opened it slowly, expecting anger or blame, but it wasn't that. "Evelyn," it began, "I don't expect forgiveness. I just need you to know that I see now what I did. I thought power meant control. I was wrong. The only power worth anything is love that doesn't have strings. I can't undo what I did to you and Daniel, but I will spend the rest of my life trying not to be that person again." I read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer. It wasn't redemption, it was a confession, a sign that maybe, somewhere in her, the truth had finally taken root. Still, I didn't write back. Some peace requires distance. Weeks later, Daniel came by with Emma, who was now walking, her curls bouncing as she ran into my arms. "Mom," he said, "Brianna wrote to me too. She wants to see Emma. What do you think?" I looked at him for a long moment. "What do you think?" He sighed. part of me wants to give her the chance to change. The other part, he didn't finish. Then give her the first part, I said. But on your terms. Let her earn trust, not ask for it. He nodded, eyes distant. Would you ever see her again? I smiled faintly. Maybe, but not as her victim. As a witness. That answer seemed to settle something in him. Over the next few months, life found a new rhythm. I spent more time at the foundation. Evelyn House had opened its doors to 12 women by then. Each had her own story, her own scars. Some had lost homes, others had lost families, but all of them shared one thing. They'd been told they were powerless, and they had chosen to prove that wrong. Watching them heal was like watching sunlight filter through cracks in old wood, slow, uneven, but beautiful. One woman, Helen, reminded me of myself from a few years earlier. She was 68, sharp-minded but weary, her daughter trying to claim guardianship over her assets. When she told me her story, her hands shook the way mine once had. I reached across the table, steadied them, and said, "You are not crazy. You are not helpless. You just need to remember who you were before fear told you otherwise." Helping others became my way of making peace with what had happened. Every time I told my story publicly, people would come up afterward with tears in their eyes. Some were children realizing what they'd done to their parents. Some were parents realizing it wasn't too late to stand up. That was the real reward, the ripple of change that came from one act of defiance. Still, at night, when the house was quiet, I often found myself thinking about the letter in that drawer. Regret is a strange thing. It doesn't disappear. It just learns to live beside you. Sometimes I wondered what kind of woman Brianna might have been if someone had taught her that control isn't love. In early spring, I received an invitation from the governor's office. They wanted to honor a group of community members for their advocacy work. I laughed when I read my name among them. When I stood on that stage months later, surrounded by people half my age, I realized something profound. Surviving hadn't just given me back my life, it had expanded it. That night, Daniel and I had dinner at a small restaurant downtown. "You know," he said, "when all this started, I thought it was about money. Now I see it was about something bigger." "What's that?" I asked. "Respect," he said. "You were the first person in our family to show me what boundaries look like." I smiled. "Boundaries aren't walls, Daniel. They're doors with locks. You decide who walks through." He laughed quietly. "You always make it sound simple." "It's not," I said. "But it's necessary." A few months later, Brianna requested to meet Daniel in a supervised family session arranged through her parole officer. He agreed, cautiously. When he told me afterward, his expression was thoughtful. "She's different," he said, "still guarded, but quieter." She asked about Emma. She didn't ask for money. She said she's been working in the prison library, helping women file legal petitions. "Maybe that's her beginning," I said. "I think so," he replied. We never spoke of her again after that, not out of avoidance but acceptance. Some stories don't need retelling once they've reached their ending. Years passed, gently. Emma grew into a curious, fearless girl who loved stories about courage. On her 8th birthday, she asked, "Grandma, why do people do bad things to people they love?" I thought about the long chain of choices that had brought us here. The greed, the manipulation, the heartbreak, the healing. Because sometimes, I told her, people are afraid they'll be forgotten. And when they don't know how to love, they try to control instead. But love isn't about keeping, it's about seeing someone free and feeling glad for them. She nodded, as if she understood more than most adults ever would. "Then I'll be the kind that loves right." I kissed her forehead. "You already are." That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the stars rise. My story had begun with betrayal, but it hadn't ended there. It had become something larger, a map for others who needed to find their way back to themselves. Sometimes, the past still whispered. I'd see flashes of the woman who once trembled at her own kitchen table, afraid to say no. But now, she didn't haunt me. She stood beside me, older, wiser, proud. Together, we watched the night settle over the garden, soft and certain. I realized then that survival wasn't the final victory. It was transformation, the quiet, unstoppable act of becoming whole again. And as I closed my eyes, I thought of all the women who were still in their kitchens, still afraid to speak, still believing it was too late. I wanted them to know one thing: it's never too late to begin again. Because the most powerful story you will ever tell is the one where you save yourself. 5 years had passed since the trial, and time, I learned, doesn't erase pain, it reshapes it. The edges soften, but the imprint remains, like handwriting pressed too hard on a page. I had grown older, yes, but also lighter. There was no more fear of silence, no more waiting for the next betrayal. I had made peace with solitude, and in doing so, found a version of myself that didn't need anyone's permission to exist. Evelyn House had expanded into 3 locations by then. I visited each one once a month, speaking with women who reminded me of who I once was, confused, ashamed, convinced that love meant surrender. They came from every kind of story: widows, mothers, caretakers, teachers, women who'd given everything and been left with nothing. I always told them the same thing: you are not broken. You were misled to believe that being good meant being silent. In one of those visits, I met a woman named June. She was 75, her voice trembling as she told me about her son who'd emptied her savings for her own good. I recognized that tone, the careful politeness of someone afraid of being disbelieved. I gave her my card and said, "If you ever doubt yourself again, call me, even at midnight." Weeks later, she did. I answered, half asleep, and she said softly, "I finally told him no." It was enough to keep me awake for hours after, smiling into the dark. Emma was growing fast, bright, fearless, always curious. One afternoon, she asked if she could come with me to one of the centers. "I want to see where you help people," she said. Watching her walk through those halls, shaking hands with women twice my age, I felt something shift. It wasn't just my legacy anymore, it was hers too. She absorbed everything: the stories, the quiet strength, the resilience. Afterward, she looked at me and said, "Grandma, when I grow up, I want to build a place where people never have to be scared again." I laughed through tears. "Then you'll do more than I ever did." Life was simple: content. Until one morning when an unfamiliar number appeared on my phone. It was Patricia, Brianna's mother. Her voice, though older, still carried that same mixture of grace and regret. "Evelyn," she said, "I thought you should know. Brianna's been released. She's different now. She works with a program that helps women rebuild after incarceration. She asked if she could write to you." I paused, uncertain. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let the past stay buried. But another part, older, steadier, understood that forgiveness wasn't about freeing her. It was about freeing myself from the echo of her name. "Tell her she can," I said. A week later, a letter arrived. It was short, written in careful cursive. "Evelyn, I saw your interview about Evelyn House. You said something that stayed with me. Some people try to own what they don't understand. I think that's what I did. I wanted to own the life I never built for myself. I don't expect to be part of yours, but I'm trying to live quietly, to help others the way you helped me, without even meaning to. I hope Emma is well. I hope Daniel forgives himself." It was not an apology in the way people expect. No grand remorse, no begging, but there was honesty in it, and that was enough. I placed it in a small box with the old documents from the case, not as a reminder of pain, but of transformation. Daniel read it later that evening. "Do you believe her?" he asked. "I believe she's trying," I said. "That's more than I expected." He looked at me thoughtfully. "You amaze me, you know that? I used to think strength was about never breaking, but you taught me it's about breaking and rebuilding anyway." I smiled. "You learned that yourself, son. I just showed you where the pieces go." That year, I was invited to give a keynote speech at a national conference on elder justice. Standing on that stage, looking out at hundreds of faces, lawyers, social workers, survivors, I realized how far I'd come from that kitchen table where I once trembled with fear. I began my speech with a story, not about the betrayal or the court case, but about the morning I first said no. That single word, I told them, wasn't defiance. It was self-respect finding its voice again. The room was silent. Then, applause broke. Not the polite kind, but the kind that carries gratitude, recognition, shared pain. I ended with something simple. If you ever find yourself in a moment where you feel invisible, remember, silence protects the wrong people. Speak, even if your voice shakes. Afterward, a woman in her 60s came up to me, clutching my hand. "I recorded your talk," she said. "I'm going to play it for my daughter tonight." I hugged her, because I knew what that meant. The healing had begun. A few months later, on my 75th birthday, Daniel and Emma surprised me with a garden party at Evelyn House. Dozens of women from the foundation came, faces I'd once known in despair, now glowing with laughter. Patricia was there too, standing quietly near the roses. She handed me a small gift, a silver pendant shaped like an open door. "For you," she said softly, "because you opened one for all of us." It was the kindest thing she could have given. As twilight settled, Emma stood on a chair to make a toast. "To Grandma," she said, raising her cup of lemonade, "for showing us that strong doesn't mean angry, and forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting." The crowd laughed, applauded, and for a moment I felt time fold in on itself, the years of fear, pain, and rebuilding all condensed into that single instant of light. Later that night, after everyone left, I walked through the empty garden, still lit by strings of soft bulbs. The air smelled of lavender and rain. I thought about my life, the parts I lost, the people who came and went, the lessons carved into me like rings inside a tree. I wasn't the same woman who had once clung to politeness out of fear. I was someone else, entirely, proof that survival isn't the end of the story, but the start of the one you finally write for yourself. As I sat on the bench, I whispered to the night, "It was all worth it." Because it was. Every heartbreak, every courtroom battle, every moment of doubt had led me here to peace, to purpose, to the understanding that age doesn't end a story, it refines it. When I finally stood to go back inside, I looked up. The stars were bright, scattered across the sky like witnesses, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like someone who had been saved. I felt like someone who had learned how to save herself, and that was enough. The following autumn arrived quietly, carrying with it a gentler kind of beauty. The leaves fell slower that year, as if the world itself had learned to breathe differently. I was 76, and for the first time in decades, I didn't feel like I was fighting for space in my own story. The past no longer followed me like a shadow, it had become part of the light. Evelyn House had grown into a movement. What began as one home for women in crisis had turned into a network across the state, safe spaces where dignity was restored and fear had no place to live. I no longer ran the day-to-day operations. Younger women, some of whom I had once mentored, had taken over. They called me Our Compass, a title that made me smile every time I heard it. I spent my days teaching workshops on resilience, though I always told the women that resilience was just another word for stubborn hope. When I spoke, I never used my notes. I told them the truth as I lived it, that pain teaches, that boundaries save, that forgiveness is freedom, not surrender. Each story I told seemed to ripple outward, and sometimes when I walked through the market or the park, a stranger would stop me and say, "You don't know me, but your story helped me say no." Those words felt like prayer. One morning, I received an invitation to a televised interview about the Foundation's anniversary. They wanted to feature me as the woman who changed how we see elder justice. I laughed at the title. It sounded too grand for a life that began in a small house with peeling paint and unpaid bills. Still, I agreed. On the day of the interview, the studio lights were warm on my face. The host, a kind woman in her 40s, asked, "Mrs. Carter, do you ever think about what you would say to the woman you were before all this happened?" I paused. The cameras caught the silence, but I didn't rush it. "I'd tell her that love isn't measured by what you give up," I said finally. "It's measured by what you refuse to lose: your dignity, your voice, your truth." I'd tell her that being alone is not the same as being abandoned, and that no one is too old to start over. The audience was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like listening, not absence. When the interview aired, messages poured in from all over: letters from seniors, from daughters, even from men who said they'd seen their mothers differently after hearing my story. I read each one. They were reminders that my pain had become something useful, That realization brought me a peace deeper than any victory ever could. Later that winter, I began writing a memoir, not a tale of revenge, but a testament to survival. I called it The House That Love Rebuilt. Writing it was harder than I expected. Every chapter felt like revisiting a wound that had healed but still ached when touched. Yet with each page I felt myself closing another door gently, not in bitterness but in gratitude. One night, as I sat writing, Daniel called. "Mom," he said, "there's something I want to tell you." His voice carried a nervous excitement I hadn't heard in years. "I met someone. Her name's Claire. She's kind, she's patient. She reminds me of you." I laughed softly. "Poor woman." He chuckled. "She's good for me, Mom, really good, and Emma loves her." I could hear the hope in his voice, the cautious joy of someone rebuilding his heart after too many storms. "Then she's the right one," I said. "Don't let fear make you stingy with happiness." Months later, he brought Claire to dinner. She was gentle, thoughtful, with the kind of smile that didn't need to prove anything. When she thanked me for inviting her, I said, "No, my dear, thank you for reminding my son that peace can also look like love." She blushed, and Daniel squeezed her hand. Emma was 10 by then, curious, outspoken, and fiercely protective of the people she loved. After dinner, she pulled me aside and said, "Grandma, when I grow up, I want to help people like you do, but I want to start earlier, maybe at 15. I laughed until tears filled my eyes. "Then start now," I told her. "Kindness doesn't have an age requirement." That spring, I visited the original Evelyn house again, the one where it all began. The paint had faded a little, but the walls were filled with laughter, not fear. A new resident named Rosa showed me a framed quote they'd hung in the lobby. "It's never too late to choose yourself. Evelyn Carter." Seeing my name there didn't make me proud. It made me humble. Because that sentence wasn't just mine, it belonged to every woman who had ever decided she was done being silent. A few weeks later, I received another letter from Brianna. She had completed her parole and was working full-time with the same re-entry program she'd once joined. She didn't ask to see us. She only wrote, "I hope you're well. I hope Emma grows up knowing that even broken people can choose to do better." For the first time, I believed her. I didn't respond, but I whispered a prayer that she would find the kind of peace she'd once tried to steal from me. The years rolled gently forward. My body slowed, but my mind remained clear. When I turned 80, Daniel organized a small celebration at the garden behind Evelyn House. Friends, advocates, and former residents gathered. Patricia was there too, older but radiant. She hugged me and said, "You turned pain into shelter." As the evening sun dipped low, Daniel stood to give a toast. "To my mother," he said, voice breaking slightly. "The woman who taught me that love without respect is just control, and that starting over doesn't mean losing it, means choosing." Everyone raised their glasses. I looked around at the faces glowing in the golden light, the women who had survived, the men who had learned, the children who would grow up freer than we were. My heart swelled with a quiet joy that words couldn't hold. When the night ended, I stayed behind for a moment, sitting among the flickering candles. The air smelled of jasmine and earth. I thought about everything that had brought me here, the humiliation, the courtroom, the betrayal, and realized none of it defined me anymore. What defined me was the choice to rise, again and again, even when no one expected me to. As I stood to leave, Emma ran back, breathless. "Grandma, you forgot this!" She handed me a small, folded note. Inside were her words, written in uneven handwriting. "When I grow up, I want to be brave like you, but not because something bad happens, just because I can." I pressed the note to my heart. That was the ending I hadn't known I needed. Not triumph, not revenge, just legacy, the quiet assurance that what had once been broken had not only healed, but multiplied. And as I walked home under the soft glow of the streetlights, I knew one thing for certain. Every battle, every heartbreak, every no that once shook my voice had been worth it. Because this was what freedom looked like, not the absence of pain, but the presence of peace that no one could ever take away again. Winter always brings back the memory of that morning, the one when everything finally came full circle. It wasn't dramatic, not like in the movies. There was no storm, no confrontation. Just soft light coming through the window, and the quiet hum of a life rebuilt. I woke early, made coffee, and realized I hadn't dreamed of the past in months. That was my first sign that I had truly healed. The foundation had grown beyond anything I could have imagined. We had 5 centers now, with over 100 women helped every year. Many of them went on to start their own small businesses or return to school. One of them, June, the same woman who once called me trembling at midnight, was now managing the second Evelyn House branch. Watching her speak to new arrivals with confidence in her voice felt like seeing a seed bloom in a garden I once thought barren. My days were full, but in a peaceful way. I taught workshops twice a week, led a book club for seniors, and visited Daniel and Claire most weekends. Emma, now 12, had inherited her father's curiosity and my stubborn streak. She'd begun volunteering at the local shelter, saying, "If Grandma can change lives at 70, I can start at 12. Every time she said it, I felt something warm break open in me, pride mixed with awe. But there was one thing left undone. The memoir I'd started a few years earlier sat unfinished in my study. I'd stopped writing after chapter 19, the chapter that ended with forgiveness. It wasn't because I'd run out of words, it was because I didn't know how to end it. The story no longer belonged just to me. It had become something living, carried by every woman who'd found her strength again. One evening, I sat down and read through everything I'd written. From the first trembling paragraphs about betrayal to the steady, measured lines about rebuilding, it felt like traveling through time. When I reached the last page, I wrote the only ending that felt true. I didn't win because I was right. I won because I refused to let being wronged define me. I closed the notebook and felt an unfamiliar stillness, like exhaling after years of holding my breath. A few months later, the foundation received a grant from a national organization. They wanted to expand Evelyn House nationwide, using our model as a blueprint. I attended the announcement ceremony, reluctantly. Large crowds still made me uneasy, but when I saw my name engraved on the plaque, I realized something that brought tears to my eyes. I had become what I once needed, proof that survival isn't luck, it's work. After the ceremony, a young woman approached me. She was in her 30s, holding a sleeping toddler. "You don't know me," she said, "but your story saved my life. I was in the same situation as you, and I found one of your talks online. That night, I packed a bag and left. My daughter's safe because of you." I touched her arm gently. "No," I said. "She's safe because of you. You did the hardest part. You believed you deserved better." It struck me then that we never really know how far the ripples of our choices travel. One act of courage, one decision to speak, can echo through generations. The following spring, Patricia passed away quietly in her sleep. She had become like a sister to me over the years. Her absence left a hollow space, but also a reminder of the unexpected friendships born from shared pain. At her memorial, I read a line she once said to me, "Integrity isn't inherited, it's chosen. Every day, even when it costs you something." Those words felt like a legacy in themselves. Time moved gently after that. Daniel and Claire married in a small ceremony at the garden behind Evelyn House. Emma walked her father down the aisle. When he said his vows, his voice broke slightly. "You taught me that love is not ownership," he said to Claire, "and I will spend the rest of my life proving it." I don't think I've ever cried so quietly or so gratefully. Years later, when Emma turned 18, she was accepted into a university program for social work. She showed me her application essay, and the first line read, "My grandmother taught me that sometimes justice doesn't come from punishment, it comes from living well." Reading those words felt like watching the final stone of a long bridge being laid. The story that began with loss had ended with legacy. When I was 79, the publishing house finally released The House That Love Rebuilt. It wasn't a bestseller in the flashy sense, but letters poured in from around the country. People wrote about how it gave them courage to confront abusers, to reclaim stolen money, to start again. The reviews called it raw, unflinching, a testament to quiet strength. I didn't care for the praise as much as the proof that it mattered. That winter, I visited the original Evelyn house one last time before stepping down completely. The staff had turned my old office into a reading room. On the wall hung a framed quote from the book, "You can't control how others treat you, but you can control whether you let it define you." I stood there for a long time, tracing the edges of the frame, and thought of all the women who had once believed they were powerless. How wrong we had been. That night, I sat by my window with a cup of tea and watched the first snow fall. My reflection in the glass looked older, softer, but not tired. There was still fire in my eyes, gentler now, but still there. I thought about the girl I'd once been, the woman I'd become, and the lives that had intersected mine along the way. If you'd told me years ago that I'd find peace after everything that happened, I wouldn't have believed you. But peace, I learned, doesn't come when the world apologizes. It comes when you stop needing it to. As I turned off the light, I whispered a quiet prayer, not for forgiveness, not for justice, but for every woman who still sits in her own kitchen, afraid to speak. I hoped she'd hear my voice somewhere out there, telling her that it's not too late, that her story isn't over, that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply says, "No more." And with that, I finally understood what my life had been trying to teach me all along. Revenge fades, justice endures, but dignity, that's eternal. When I look back now, I realize the real story was never about betrayal or revenge. Those were only the sparks that forced a deeper fire to begin the slow, powerful burn of rediscovering who I was. For most of my life, I had mistaken endurance for love. I believed that being needed was the same as being valued. But the truth came to me in the hardest way. Love that demands your silence isn't love. It's control wrapped in affection. Every moment of pain became a teacher. I learned that forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the quiet decision to stop letting someone else's cruelty narrate your life. I learned that boundaries are not walls. They are doors you choose to open or close with purpose. I learned that no age, no heartbreak, no loss can make you too late to begin again. Starting over at 70, at 80, or at any point in life isn't a tragedy, it's courage. Evelyn's journey, at its heart, was a mirror for so many of us. It asked the question most people avoid: what do you do when the people you love most become the ones who hurt you? Some shut down. Some give in. But the ones who rise, the ones who truly heal, are those who stop asking, "Why me?" and start asking, "What now?" That shift changes everything. The story also reminds us that revenge, while satisfying for a moment, never builds peace. Justice does. Dignity does. There is power in holding your head high when others expect you to fall apart. There is strength in rebuilding quietly, in choosing kindness without surrendering your worth. Evelyn found justice not in punishment, but in creation, turning her pain into shelter, her tears into guidance, her silence into a voice that others could follow. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Life doesn't always give closure, but it always gives choice. Every betrayal is an invitation to define who you'll become next. We can either stay trapped in the version of ourselves that others diminished, or we can rise, one boundary, one act of self-respect at a time, and build something stronger from the ruins. So if this story has touched you, take a quiet moment to think about your own boundaries. Think about the moments when you stayed silent to keep peace, and whether that peace was ever real. Then ask yourself, when faced with betrayal or disrespect, which path leads you to peace, holding on or letting go? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Has there been a moment in your life when standing up for yourself changed everything? Share your experience in the comments so others can find strength in your words too. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories of courage, justice, and redemption, please consider subscribing to the channel. Every click, every comment, every bit of support helps us keep creating stories that remind people that it's never too late to take back your power.